Russia has a problem with the quality of its military recruits. And while the Kremlin has had a bunch of other problems with its military since the invasion of Ukraine began, this one is particularly pernicious. You see, there is no simple solution to fix the problem. And to pile on the bad news for Russia, it will only get worse as the war continues. The irony of the situation is that this problem came into being as a consequence of the Kremlin trying to fix a different problem. In war, it helps to have an army that is dedicated to the cause. The moment that you start bringing money into the equation, though, you start to get mixed motives. And the more money that you put on the table, the worse it gets. So, today, we will cover why professionalism and sense of duty in the military are so important, where it has already been lacking for Russia in the current war, the evolution of Russia's recruitment strategy over the course of the war so far, why Russia's current voluntary recruitment strategy encourages the wrong people to join, and why the alternatives available to Russia to solve that problem are not great. But we begin with duty and professionalism in the military. In the most basic sense, a professional soldier does what is asked, despite the personal sacrifices that an order may entail. Unsurprisingly, if you had no other considerations, you would want to staff your ranks exclusively with soldiers instilled with that sense of duty. It will save you a lot of headaches in the long run, and yelling for that matter, because they just do what they are supposed to do. The central problem that any recruiting officer faces, Russian or otherwise, is that a sense of duty is not something that you can directly observe. You cannot just look at two people and say, well, this one is going to be a truly professional soldier, but this guy over here is clearly a dud. Duty is not an expression that people wear on their faces. It is an internal characteristic that takes time for someone else to appreciate. As a result, the game that any army has to play is to figure out how to best separate the dedicated from the undedicated. Actually, this is a central problem for businesses too. Economists call it price discrimination. Basically, if you know the various characteristics of an individual, you can guess the most that person is willing to pay for your goods or services. That is why companies partner with data brokers to learn more about you and extract as high of a price as they can, without your consent. Legally, these companies must remove your information if you ask, but they make it very difficult. Thus, I have partnered with the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Aura does the hard work of removing your private information for you. They are a one-stop shop to protect your personal information, give you a secure VPN, monitor your identity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, send you real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, every layer of protection in just one app. And good news, by going to aura.com/linesonmaps or scanning the QR code on your screen, you can get a 14-day free trial, which is more than enough time to see what information of yours has been exposed. So thanks again to Aura for supporting this channel. Well, personal data can only take a recruitment officer so far. Let's say for a moment that he cannot screen out the undedicated soldiers. What happens next? Good news. I have previously discussed Russia's problems on this front, with a focus on what the Kremlin was doing to try to fix the problem. I just rewatched it, and it is still a banger. But today's focus is on how the evolution in Russia's recruitment strategy has changed the problem, because there is an inaccurate perception that Russia's voluntary recruitment scheme provides a solution. That is wrong. However, the prerequisite for understanding all that is to first appreciate the consequences of recruiting the wrong type of soldier. Let me give you two quick examples tied to the war that you already know. Imagine that you are a Russian soldier sitting in Belarus. You have heard rumors that you may soon be taking a glorious trip to Ukraine, but in the meantime, you are getting kind of bored. Well, you have some vehicles nearby full of petrol, and you know that you can flip the fuel in a nearby town for a quick ruble, and then take your money to the local bar for a fun night. Awesome for you, for sure. Not so great for the person who was driving the vehicle to Kyiv, got stuck halfway there, and then was exterminated in a Ukrainian ambush. A professional soldier would not do that. An unprofessional soldier would light up the town. Alternatively, 2 detachments are about to execute a flanking maneuver on a Ukrainian position. You are supposed to time it simultaneously so that Ukraine has no time to react. Congrats on your easy victory. But in practice, it is not so simple. Imagine that this guy is you. If you wait for the other group to go first, then they will draw Ukrainian fire, leaving you with the much safer cleanup duty. But it gets worse. The other detachment may recognize the same benefit of slow playing, so everyone ends up advancing tepidly, thereby giving Ukraine a fighting chance. A professional soldier would just go. An unprofessional soldier would defer to the other group. Of course, there are actions that Russia can take to mitigate those problems. To handle the equipment problem, you might congregate many of your soldiers together to facilitate higher-ranked officers monitoring the group's behavior. Or, for the other problem, you might place so-called barrier troops behind the front waves, who will shoot any Russian soldiers who refuse to comply with the orders for haste. Then again, those solutions come with their own risks. Large congregation of troops? Meet HIMARS, which will be oh so happy to see such a juicy target. Just remember to inflate your tires first? Barrier troops? Well, sometimes a retreat is the right call, but good luck explaining that to men trying to hunt cowards. Thus, the more elegant solution is to leave the unprofessional soldiers at home, manning the parades and not handling sensitive tasks. Yet Russia is doing the opposite right now. Ultimately, I want to explain the specific mechanism that is causing Russia's current problem. But we first need a quick review of Russian recruitment strategies to see how all of this comes together. Phase 1 of the war was to send over the troops that Russia had on hand. The invasion was not supposed to last long, so they should have been sufficient for the task. Adding anyone to the cause would have needlessly disrupted harmony in the homeland, and tipped off the West to Russia's intentions. Well, oops. Phase 2 began after Ukraine's fall 2022 counteroffensive pushed back the eastern line. The Kremlin recognized that the men on hand were insufficient for the job, and opted for the easiest solution imaginable: randomly summon a whole bunch more people to the front. However, this move infuriated Putin's domestic audience. Many tried to dodge summons by hiding and bribing. We will come back to them later. Others left the country entirely to avoid the meat grinder. And thus we moved into Phase 3, where Russia recruits voluntarily. Draft offices set a wage, and then increase the wage until they attract enough recruits to fulfill their quotas. Simple enough. And also great for reducing revolutionary motives. The cost of war was now socialized across the entire population in the form of higher explicit and implicit taxes. But no one was risking their lives unless they thought that their wage was adequate. The political benefits of voluntary recruitment may be great for the Kremlin, but let's think a bit harder about who is actually joining up. To simplify the logic as much as possible, 3 things now determine whether a citizen becomes a soldier. 1, their current quality of life. You might shorthand this as the expected lifetime earnings of this individual, but you might also include other things like zest for life and risk tolerance. 2, the wage that Russian recruitment offices are paying. And 3, a perceived duty to the state. Think of it as altruism, patriotism, or whatever. But it is the thing that simultaneously makes going to Ukraine look more attractive for the individual, and governs how professional that future soldier will be. Take the wage offered, add your sense of duty, and if that exceeds your current quality of life, then go have fun in Ukraine. Plotting this, for any given wage and quality of life, there is a critical duty level such that those with higher senses of duty join, and those with lower senses of duty stay at home. Remember that recruiters care about wages and duty because they need to pay their men. However, battle planners only care about maximizing duty. After all, professional soldiers are the ones who will follow orders and help bring about a glorious victory. But do you see the problem here? Higher wages bring in a worse mix of high and low duty soldiers. To understand why, think about what happens when you set wages close to zero. The only people willing to join are those that have a huge sense of service. If the money really mattered to them, they could go get a job at Dunkin' or whatever faux Dunkin' has taken its place post-sanctions, and make a bunch more cash there by serving donuts to randos from the streets of Moscow like, I don't know, this guy. They do not need the money because they carry enough duty. Well, raise the wages, and those folks will still be excited to join. But you will also start getting a mix of people who do not have anything better to do with their lives, desperately need the money, and have only middling affinities for Mother Russia. And perhaps you now see why this is a long-term problem for Russia. As the war continues, the casualties are mounting, and it seems that the last 8 months have been especially grinding, even if the monthly gains are accumulating into something more substantial. Well, if the Kremlin wants to keep filling the front lines and juicing those exchange numbers, it needs to keep the fresh recruits flowing. The problem is that all of the folks below a certain wage level have already shipped out to Ukraine. That well is dry. Thus, to recruit more humans, you need to raise wages. But what happens then? A larger segment of the lower duty recruits sign on. Specifically, these guys join now, whereas they were below the duty cut point with lower wages. So you get more troops, but they are less effective, which actually means you need even more troops to achieve your goals. But that means a wage increase and yet more low-duty privates. Welcome to the ratchet effect. We have seen the consequences of this before. Remember the good old days of the Wagner Group? When they recruited out of prison, they were effectively offering massive wages. Your freedom, if you survived. As a result, the graph was basically way over here, and so even convicts with low senses of duty signed up. And although I have avoided mentioning this because I did not want to convolute today's point, the distribution of prisoner duty levels was concentrated way down here anyway. So, sure, there may have been a handful of convict soldiers up here, but the vast majority of them were coming from down here. It turns out that they were bad soldiers, and so Russia had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to keep them on task. Now, Russia's current government position is nowhere near that bad, but it will get worse over time. And not that Ukraine needed to hear this, but it is a hidden reason why maintaining high opposing casualty figures is important. Finally, let's discuss the alternatives that Russia has at its disposal. One option is to revert back to forced mobilization. Ironically, the duty incentives are flipped here. If implemented faithfully, you would get a smattering of all segments of society, and a decent range of committed versus uncommitted conscripts. But that is not how things work in Russia. No, the system is corrupt. If you do not want to be deployed, a sufficiently large bribe can buy you out of your service. Okay, well, think about the type of person who will bribe their way out. You still have that current value of your status quo life. You also have a sense of duty. The wage, though? That is gone. We are no longer thinking about voluntary recruitment. And, actually, to maintain the status quo, you now have to pay the proper bribe. Thus, the people that end up going are those who simply cannot afford the bribe, but critically also those with a relatively high sense of duty. It completely flips the perverse incentive structure that offering a competitive wage introduced. A bribe is effectively a negative wage. But the economics of forced mobilization are horribly inefficient. It will make people angry, and you will have to deal with protesters on the street. So the Kremlin is not going back to that solution. Sure, it solves the problem that we are focused on today, but it introduces 10 other and bigger issues. A more practical solution is to introduce a longer training period for contract soldiers. Many Western countries, the United States included, also have volunteer armies, but do not suffer from this problem, or at least not nearly to the extent that Russia does. Part of what is going on here is that it helps to be a democratic state, so the population starts with a greater commitment to the country. But beyond that, the United States is not just sending newly enlisted sailors straight to Yemen. There is a long period of training before any of that happens, and that gives officers plenty of time to sort out who might be a liability later, and also instill a sense of duty that may not have existed beforehand. Russia could institute that type of process too. However, it would also mean having to dip deeper into the recruitment pool, so that they are always, say, 3 months further along than they currently are. And maybe the Kremlin will have to consider that as it pushes further along the wage chart and the duty problem gets worse. For now, though, it seems that economic concerns are the greater priority. The greater the recruitment, the more that Russian inflation ticks up. Yep, I guess this was just another long argument that inflation always wins. Well, except when it comes to my 2 awesome books about the war. A dollar's purchasing power may have declined, but I have kept their prices steady. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.